I went to buy some animals at the auction, but the farmer said, "Come inside, I want to show you something better." I walked into that dusty auction yard expecting nothing more than a business deal. But the farmer's eyes locked on mine, and his voice carried a strange intensity when he said, "Come inside, I want to show you something better." I didn't know it then, but that moment would change everything. What I thought would be about animals turned into something far more personal, something about desire, about trust, and about a connection I never imagined I would find in a place like that. What he wanted to show me wasn't in the stalls or the pens. It was something hidden, something unspoken, something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself and about love. Stay until the end, because this story is not just about a barn or an auction. It's about two men who discover that sometimes the most unexpected places hide the most unforgettable emotions. Subscribe now, like this video, and turn on notifications, because what happens next will leave you breathless. The auction yard smelled of hay and dust, a familiar mix that usually reminded me of routine, not possibility. I had gone there with a clear plan in mind: pick out a couple of animals, settle the deal, and head back before the evening sun disappeared behind the hills. But that day, nothing felt routine. The farmer who greeted me wasn't just any man. His presence filled the space like he owned not just the land, but every breath of air around it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore his years in the way his eyes seemed to see through everything. His shirt clung to his chest, streaked with the sweat of honest work, and his hands looked as if they had built this place from the ground up. There was something rough, something undeniably masculine about him, but also something tender in the way he paused before speaking. "Looking to buy?" he asked, his tone firm yet laced with something I couldn't quite name. I nodded, clearing my throat. "Just a few animals. Nothing much." His gaze lingered on me longer than it should have. It wasn't just a salesman sizing up a buyer. It felt like he was studying me, trying to read what I wasn't saying. Then, with a half-smile, he leaned closer and said words that would echo in my head for hours after. "Come inside. I want to show you something better." I hesitated. The barn behind him looked ordinary enough, its doors weathered and marked by years of use. But the way he said it made me feel like crossing that threshold meant stepping into something I wasn't prepared for. Still, my legs carried me forward, curiosity pulling harder than reason. Inside, the light shifted. Dust floated in golden beams from the cracks in the wood, and the air was warmer, more intimate. It wasn't crowded like the auction yard. Here, it was just him and me. "Name's Daniel," he said, finally breaking the silence. "Ethan," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. He walked ahead, boots pressing against the wooden floor, the sound steady and unhurried. I followed, my eyes catching every detail: the strong line of his back, the way his hands rested at his sides, the slight turn of his head as if to make sure I was still there. We stopped by a stall where two horses stood, their coats shimmering in the sunlight that filtered through. They were beautiful, but my attention wasn't on them. "These aren't what I wanted to show you," Daniel said. His voice dropped, lower now, almost intimate. He turned, and our eyes met in a silence that stretched longer than it should have. I tried to steady my breathing. Why was I reacting this way? I'd come here for animals, not for whatever this was. Yet, standing so close to him, I felt my chest tighten with an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Daniel reached out, brushing his hand against the stall door. His fingers were rough, scarred from years of labor, but when his eyes returned to mine, there was something vulnerable hidden behind their strength. "You seem different," he said quietly. "Most men who come here, they only see the animals. But you're looking at something else." His words struck me like a spark to dry wood. Was I that transparent? Or was he just seeing straight into me, cutting through the walls I had built? I tried to laugh it off, but it came out shaky. Maybe I'm just tired. But Daniel didn't look away. "No, it's not that." The weight of his stare was almost unbearable. I felt exposed, as if he knew every thought running through my head. The confusion, the attraction, the fear of admitting it even to myself. "Why me?" I asked suddenly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. His lips curved into something between a smile and a confession. "Because you remind me of something I thought I'd lost." My heart raced. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my throat tightened. Instead, I looked away, pretending to study the horses. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I could feel heat rising in my face. Daniel stepped closer, and the air seemed to shrink between us. I could feel his presence, strong and steady, yet carrying an energy that pulled me in. He didn't touch me, not yet, but it felt like he could, and the possibility alone sent a rush through my body. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said, his voice low, calm, but laced with intensity. I swallowed hard. There it was, the thing I had tried so hard to ignore, to bury. And now, in this barn, with this man, it was rising to the surface whether I was ready or not. Before I could answer, footsteps echoed from outside. Loud, abrupt, breaking the fragile moment. Someone was approaching the barn. Daniel's jaw tightened, and he glanced at me quickly, as if making a decision in that instant. "Not here," he whispered, urgency in his tone. The barn door creaked, and the shadow of another man stretched across the floor. And just like that, everything we almost said was swallowed by the sound of that door opening. The barn door creaked open, its hinges crying out against the sudden weight, and I froze. My heart thudded so loudly in my chest I swore Daniel could hear it. Whoever was outside was now inside, and the fragile current that had just been building between us shattered into silence. A man stepped in, older, wiry, his clothes marked with mud and sweat. He had the look of someone who had worked these fields his entire life, and his narrowed eyes swept the barn before landing on Daniel. "Got some buyers outside a skin for you," the man said, his voice rough, almost suspicious. Daniel's body shifted. His frame stiffened like a soldier caught off guard. He nodded once, curt, then flicked a quick glance at me, brief but meaningful, as if telling me not to move, not to say a word. "I'll be right there," Daniel replied. His voice was steady, though the tension was clear. The man gave me a curious look, one eyebrow raising just slightly, before muttering under his breath and pulling the door closed behind him. His footsteps faded, leaving the barn silent again. I let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice shaky. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he ran a hand across the back of his neck, his jaw working as if he was weighing what to say. Finally, he met my eyes. "Joe," he said. "My foreman. He doesn't ask many questions. But he notices things. More than I'd like." I blinked. "Notices what?" Daniel stepped closer, his boots scraping softly against the wooden floor. "Us." The single word felt heavy, charged. My pulse jumped, and suddenly I wasn't sure if the barn was too warm or if it was just me. I wanted to ask what exactly he meant by us, but deep down, I already knew. "Daniel," I started, but he held up his hand, his eyes steady and serious. "You don't have to say it," he interrupted. "I saw it in your eyes the moment you walked in. And I'm not blind to the way you're looking at me now." Heat flushed across my face. I wanted to deny it, brush it off, but the words stuck. The truth was too close, too undeniable. "I shouldn't be," I whispered. This isn't what I came here for." Daniel tilted his head, his expression softening. "Sometimes, what we find isn't what we came looking for." His words wrapped around me like a net, pulling me in deeper even as my mind screamed for caution. I had built my life on rules, on keeping myself guarded, on never stepping beyond the lines that kept me safe. And yet, here I was in a barn, staring at a man who had just cracked open a door inside me I wasn't sure I wanted closed again. The silence stretched, charged, neither of us willing to break it. Then, with the faintest smile, Daniel gestured toward the back of the barn. "Come on. Let me show you what I meant." We walked past the stalls until we reached a small side room, tucked away, almost hidden. He pushed the door open, revealing a space lit by a single hanging bulb. Inside were not animals, but shelves lined with old photographs, worn leather-bound books, and a desk covered in maps. "What is this?" I asked, stepping inside. "My father's office," Daniel said. His voice softened with memory. "He built this farm from nothing. Everything you see out there started with him." He touched one of the photographs, an image of a younger man who bore Daniel's jawline and steady eyes. I keep it the same, as if he'll walk back in any day. I could hear the vulnerability in his voice, the quiet grief that lingered beneath his strength. It was the first crack in his armor I'd seen, and it drew me closer. "You take care of all this alone?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "Joe helps. But most of it, yes." His eyes lingered on me again, that same searching intensity. "Sometimes it feels less like a farm and more like a weight." And then, he stopped himself, the words trailing off. "And then?" I pressed gently. His gaze held mine. "And then you walk in, and for the first time in years, I don't feel alone." The air thickened, charged with something too raw to ignore. My chest tightened, my throat dry. I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to see if this electricity between us was real or just my imagination. But fear tangled with desire, holding me in place. "You don't even know me," I whispered. "I know enough," he said simply. His honesty shook me more than any declaration could have. It wasn't rehearsed, wasn't wrapped in pretty words. It was just real. Before I could respond, voices carried from outside. But persistent. Someone was calling Daniel's name. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if steadying himself, then looked back at me. "Stay here," he said firmly. "Don't move." I wanted to argue, to ask why, but the urgency in his tone silenced me. He stepped out, the door closing behind him, leaving me in that small room surrounded by the ghosts of his past. Minutes passed, though they felt longer. I paced the floor, my mind racing with everything unsaid between us. The world outside that barn seemed distant, unreal compared to the fire that had just sparked inside these walls. Then I heard it, raised voices. Not just Daniel's, but others. Joe's for sure, and maybe more men. The sound grew sharper, angrier. My chest tightened. Something was happening. Something that wasn't just about me and him anymore. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough. Buyers, questions, you spend too much time, people talk. The pit of my stomach dropped. Were they talking about me? About us? The barn door slammed again, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. And then, without warning, the office door handle rattled. Someone was trying to get in. The handle rattled once, then again, more forcefully. My chest tightened, and every muscle in my body tensed. I glanced around the small room, searching for somewhere to hide, but there was nowhere, just shelves stacked with books and papers, the desk, and the dim bulb swinging slightly above me. The sound of boots scraping against the wooden floor made my throat go dry. Then suddenly, the door stilled. A heavy silence followed. Whoever was on the other side hadn't left. They were waiting. I held my breath, frozen in place. Seconds stretched, unbearable. Then Daniel's voice cut through the air. Controlled. "This room's off limits." The tension in my chest eased slightly, but the weight of the moment didn't disappear. Whoever stood outside muttered something I couldn't catch. Daniel's boots thudded closer until the sound faded, and finally, mercifully, the barn door creaked shut again. The handle of the office turned slowly this time, and the door cracked open. Daniel stepped inside, his eyes meeting mine instantly. His expression was unreadable, part relief, part fire. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, exhaling hard. "You shouldn't have heard that," he said quietly. I swallowed, my voice thin. "They were talking about me, weren't they?" Daniel didn't answer at first. He pushed away from the door and walked closer, his broad frame filling the small room. His silence said more than words could. "Daniel," I pressed, softer now, "what's going on?" His eyes locked on mine, burning with an intensity that both unsettled and anchored me. They don't trust outsiders. And they sure as hell don't like me spending time with one. The words stung, though I knew he wasn't blaming me. He was caught in something larger than just us. Farm politics, small-town whispers, whatever currents pulled at him day after day. But even with all that, I couldn't ignore what was happening between us. The way he looked at me made the rest of the world fade. "Maybe I should go," I said, my voice trembling. "No." His response was immediate, sharp, almost desperate. He stepped closer, and before I could move, his hand brushed against mine. Just the lightest touch, but it was enough to send a jolt through me. His skin was rough, calloused, but the way he touched me was careful, deliberate. "Don't go," he said again, quieter this time. The world seemed to shrink to that single moment. The weight of his hand, the closeness of his body, the way his eyes searched mine for something I wasn't sure I could give. My heart pounded, torn between fear and the undeniable pull I felt toward him. "Why me?" I asked again, my voice nearly breaking. Daniel's jaw flexed. "Because I see myself in you. The part I've been hiding. The part one thought I could bury under work and silence. But you walked in here, and suddenly I can't hide anymore." The vulnerability in his voice cracked something inside me. For so long, I had told myself to keep my head down, to never admit what I wanted, to avoid the risk of being seen too clearly. But here he was, saying the very words I had been too afraid to even think. "I don't know if I'm ready," I whispered. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine, his voice dropping low. "Neither am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." My breath caught. Every instinct screamed at me to step back, to retreat before this went too far. But another part of me, the part that had been aching in silence for years, wanted nothing more than to close the distance between us. His hand lifted slowly, hesitantly, as if asking permission. He brushed a strand of hair from my forehead, his fingers grazing my skin. It was such a simple touch, yet it felt like the most intimate thing I had ever experienced. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting myself feel it, letting the walls inside me falter. When I opened them, his gaze hadn't moved. He was watching me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. And then, just as the moment was about to tip into something irreversible, the sound of raised voices echoed again from outside. This time louder. Angrier. Daniel's expression darkened. He pulled back, his hand lingering for a second before dropping to his side. "They won't stop," he muttered. "They think I'm hiding something." "Are you?" I asked, my words sharper than I meant them to be. His eyes flicked to mine, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw fear. Real fear. Not of them, but of us. "Yes," he said finally. "You." The confession hung in the air, raw and undeniable. My chest tightened. I didn't know if I should feel terrified or alive. Maybe both. Before I could respond, the barn door slammed open again. This time the footsteps were fast, purposeful. The office door shook as fists pounded against it. "Daniel," a voice barked. "We know he's in there with you. Open up." Daniel's eyes locked on mine, fierce and protective. "Stay behind me," he whispered. The pounding grew louder, the wood groaning under the force. My pulse raced, my mind spinning. What would happen if they burst in? What would they do if they saw us here like this? And then, with a violent crack, the office door began to splinter. The wood groaned, splinters snapping under each heavy blow. I pressed myself against the back wall, my breath sharp, my heart slamming against my ribs as if trying to break free. Daniel stood in front of me, shoulders squared, fists clenched at his sides. He looked less like a farmer in that moment and more like a man bracing for battle. "Stay behind me," he repeated, his voice steady even as the pounding grew louder. With one final slam, the office door burst open, the hinges squealing as the frame gave way. Joe stood at the front, two other men behind him, both broad, with faces set hard as stone. Their eyes flicked from Daniel to me, and the tension in the room thickened until it was nearly suffocating. "What the hell is going on in here?" Joe demanded, his gaze narrowing. Daniel didn't flinch. "Nothing that concerns you." Joe's lip curled, his eyes darting back to me. "You've got outsiders sniffing around where they don't belong. People are talking, Daniel. They're saying you're not focused on the work anymore. That you're distracted." I swallowed hard, the weight of their stares pressing down on me. My presence here wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous. Not because of me, but because of what my being here exposed. Daniel took a step forward, his frame blocking me entirely from their view. I said, "It's none of your business." One of the other men scoffed. "Your business is our business when the farm's reputation is at stake. We all depend on this place. And if you can't keep your head straight, watch yourself, Daniel snapped, his voice sharp as a whip. The silence that followed was electric, thick with the threat of violence. My chest ached with the effort of keeping still, of not running, of not making everything worse. Finally, Joe raised a hand, stopping the men behind him. His eyes lingered on me one last time before returning to Daniel. You'd better get things under control. People around here don't forgive distractions. With that, they turned, leaving the door hanging broken in its frame. The sound of their boots faded, but the weight of their presence lingered, heavy and suffocating. I let out a shaky breath, my hands trembling. Daniel, what was that? He didn't answer right away. His fists slowly unclenched, but his shoulders remained tense. When he finally turned to me, his expression was unreadable, anger, fear, and something deeper all mixed together. They don't understand, he said finally, his voice low. This place is everything to them. Any sign of weakness, any hint of scandal, and they'll turn on me. Scandal? I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands gripping my arms, firm but not painful. You don't get it. Out here, men like me, men like us, we don't get to feel things like this. Not openly. Not without paying a price. His words hit me harder than the pounding fists had. Men like us. He'd said it even if only in a whisper. The truth we'd both been circling around was suddenly laid bare, raw and undeniable. Daniel, my voice cracked, half fear, half longing. His grip softened, his hands sliding down until his fingers brushed against mine. I don't care what they think, he said, quieter now, his eyes burning into mine. But I need to know, do you? I wanted to answer, wanted to say the words that had been clawing at my throat since the moment he first looked at me differently. But the fear was still there, coiled tight inside me. If I said yes, if I admitted it, there would be no turning back. Before I could speak, Daniel leaned in, his forehead resting gently against mine. The warmth of his breath, the strength of his presence, it was all-consuming. Say something, he whispered. My lips parted, but the words caught. All I managed was the truth I'd been too afraid to name. I can't stop thinking about you. For a moment, everything stilled. The world outside the barn, the voices, the judgment, they all disappeared. It was just us, suspended in that fragile, electric silence. Daniel's hands cupped my face, rough palms surprisingly gentle. His eyes searched mine, as if making sure I meant it, as if giving me one last chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. And then, slowly, inevitably, he closed the distance between us. The kiss was tentative at first, careful, almost hesitant. But beneath it was a fire we had both been trying to smother. My chest ached with the release of it, with the weight of finally letting go. His lips pressed harder, and the world tilted. For the first time, I wasn't running from myself. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, his forehead rested against mine again. Now you understand, he said, his voice barely audible. I nodded, my heart still racing. I do. But the moment was cut short by the sound of an engine roaring outside. The crunch of gravel under tires. More voices. Daniel's jaw tightened, and he glanced toward the broken door. They're not done. They're bringing others. Fear surged back into me, sharp and cold. What are we supposed to do? He looked at me, his expression fierce, unyielding. We stand our ground. Together. The words should have comforted me, but instead they filled me with dread. Because standing our ground meant being seen, being exposed. And I wasn't sure either of us was ready for what would come after that. The voices outside grew louder, closer. The crunch of boots on gravel. The barn's wooden walls seemed thinner now, every sound bleeding through. Daniel took my hand, squeezing it tightly, his eyes never leaving mine. No matter what happens next, he said, don't doubt what's between us. The barn door groaned again, shadows stretching across the floor as more men entered. Their footsteps echoed, deliberate and heavy. I gripped his hand harder, my breath caught in my throat. And then, a voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding, we need to talk. The voice that filled the barn was not Joe's, nor one of the hired hands. It was older, sharper, laced with authority. Daniel's eyes widened the second he heard it. He let go of my hand, though the warmth lingered on my skin like a fading ember. "Mr. Harlow," Daniel muttered, almost under his breath. An older man stepped into the barn, flanked by two others. His gray hair was slicked back, his face carved with years of harsh sun and harsher choices. The way he looked at Daniel was not with kindness, but with disappointment. "I gave you this farm to run," Harlow said, his tone cold. "And now I find you hiding away with him?" His eyes cut toward me, filled with disdain. My stomach turned, shame crawling up my throat even though I had done nothing wrong. Daniel stood taller, his jaw set, his chest rising with slow, deliberate breaths. "You don't get to decide who I spend my time with," Daniel said. His voice was calm, but I could feel the storm inside him. Harlow stepped closer, his boots echoing against the wooden floor. "You think men around here won't notice? You think they'll follow you if they know the truth? This place will eat you alive, Daniel. And it will drag him down with you." The barn seemed to shrink, the air suffocating. Every word felt like a blade, cutting through the fragile thread of hope I'd been holding on to. Daniel glanced back at me, his eyes full of something raw and unspoken, love, defiance, fear. Then he turned to Harlow. "If I have to lose everything just to be honest about who I am, then maybe it's worth it." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My breath caught, tears stinging my eyes. For the first time, someone had said out loud what I'd been too afraid to admit, that our connection was real and it mattered. But Harlow's face hardened. "Then you've already lost." The silence that followed was unbearable. The weight of those words pressed down on us until I felt crushed by them. Daniel's hand twitched at his side, as if he wanted to reach for me again, but he didn't. He stood still, rooted to the ground, his pride keeping him upright even as the cost of his truth loomed over him. I wanted to scream, to tell Harlow that he was wrong, that what Daniel and I shared wasn't shameful, wasn't weakness. But the words never made it past my lips. Fear chained them down, the same fear I had carried for years. Finally, Daniel's voice broke the silence, soft but steady. "Go," he said, his eyes locked on mine. I shook my head, my throat tight. "No. Not without you." "You have to," he insisted, his voice cracking now, the strength faltering. "They'll destroy everything you've built, everything you are. Don't let them take that from you." Tears blurred my vision, but I could still see the way his eyes shone with something deeper than words. An apology, a goodbye, a promise all at once. "I can't just walk away," I whispered. "You can," he said. "And you will. Because I'd rather be the one they break than watch them break you." It felt like the world stopped then. Every sound faded, every thought silenced, until there was only the echo of his words and the hollow ache they carved inside me. I wanted to fight, to hold him, to refuse. But when Harlow's men stepped closer, their eyes cold and unyielding, I knew Daniel was right. Staying would only put both of us in the fire. With trembling steps, I moved toward the barn door. Daniel's gaze never left me, even as his hands clenched at his sides, holding back everything he couldn't say. At the threshold, I turned one last time. "Daniel," I called, my voice breaking. His lips curved into the faintest smile, but his eyes betrayed him, wet, shining, heavy with the same sorrow that consumed me. "Go," he said again, softer now. And so I did. The sunlight outside was blinding, cruel in its brightness. Each step away from the barn felt like tearing a piece of myself out and leaving it behind. My chest ached, my legs weak, but I kept moving because he had asked me to. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. Because if I had, I would have run to him, consequences be damned. And I knew he wouldn't have let me go a second time. That night, I lay awake, the smell of hay still clinging to my clothes, the taste of his kiss still lingering on my lips. I thought about the strength it took for him to stand there, unflinching, ready to lose everything just for the truth. And I thought about the cowardice it took for me to leave. I'll never know what became of him after that day. The farm went silent in the weeks that followed, whispers replacing facts, rumors replacing truth. But I carry him with me still, The way his hands trembled when they touched mine, the fire in his voice when he refused to hide anymore, the sadness in his eyes when he told me to go. This story isn't about a happy ending. It's about the kind of love that arrives like a storm, brief, wild, and unforgettable. The kind that shows you who you are, even if it leaves you broken. And if I learned anything, it's this. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in holding on. It's in letting go.